So, Bad Boys for Life is the third Bad Boys film, and it's been a while since we've seen Will Smith and Martin Lawrence in the role of cops Mike and Marcus, as they're cops who kind of play by their own rules and get the chief really mad at them, and they cause all kinds of collateral damage and deal with very dangerous people. Now, this is kind of an interesting return because it's been a little while. You know, they're a little bit older. Their lives have changed a little bit. We have new directors in charge now. We don't have Michael Bay this time. This time we have fairly new directors of Aldi El Arabi and Bial Fala. They're fairly new directors. It seems like they've done a little bit more television than they've done film. But I was actually pretty excited about that part because I'm like, okay, let's see what some new directors can do and what can they take from here. Like if Michael Bay was in charge, I'd pretty much know what Michael Bay was going to do, how he would shoot the film, the little beats they would have going throughout. But here we actually have something a little bit different. Now the way that the film kind of starts off, I like the way that this film starts because it has a very interesting aspect. It focuses on the fact that, you know, these characters are getting older, their lives are changing. Marcus is now, he's basically going to retire from being a detective because he's got a much different life now. His daughter has just had her first child, so now he's a grandpa, and he's got to realize, I can't quite be in a bad boy anymore with you. Meanwhile, Will Smith playing Mike is just still like, I can still do this. I'm still want to be that hard-edged detective. Like, I've still got it in me. I'm still physically fit. I know what I'm doing. And of course, he's going to be called back in because a ghost from his past comes back to haunt him. When apparently there's, and I'm not quite sure how to describe this correctly, but and they make this as kind of like a weird twist, but not quite as weird as it could have been. That there's a supposed witch. I'm not joking here. A supposed witch, and they keep referring to her as a witch. Who is tracking down not Martin Lawrence. He's tracking down Mike because he was involved with a case where where her husband was wronged, and she ended up in prison for the longest time. So now she's escaped, and she's seeking revenge on everyone who took her down, namely a lot of police officers. And apparently Mike is the last person on that list, and she's hired a hitman to go take him out. Now, what I found interesting about this is that initially Mike is kind of the first target. Like at one point, Mike gets gunned down in the streets. And there's a very interesting scene here, which I think this is probably the most interesting scene and also the most frustrating scene, which is that when Mike is under the knife and getting the bullets taken out of him, Martin Lawrence as Marcus is basically praying to his God, saying, look, if you save my friend, if you just give him more life, give him another chance, I swear that I promise you, I will not bring any more violence into this world. And sure enough, Mike ends up, Mike lives to be a bad boy another day. And of course, because this happens about 20 minutes into the film, of course, he's not going to die. But here's the weird thing. It's like that scene of Martin Lawrence praying, it's filmed very genuinely. It might have been tongue-in-cheek, I might have been misreading it maybe a little bit, but it seemed very genuine that he didn't want to bring more violence into the world, which of course gives him more incentive to sort of retire from the bad boys lifestyle. But here's the problem, like, that's an interesting aspect, but I think the film realizes about halfway through that this isn't going to work, because this is a Jerry Bruckheimer produced action film with Will Smith and Martin Lawrence running around with guns, being targeted by a cartel and lots of people shooting at them, and there's lots of car chases and explosions. So that whole non-violence angle is not going to play out. Which I find kind of interesting because no less than a month ago we had another Will Smith film, Spies in Disguise, which addressed this very concept of being non-violent, especially since Will Smith played a similar character in that film, someone who favors violence and sort of learns that, you can save the day without gunning down everyone and killing a bunch of people. Now, Bad Boys for Life is exactly the opposite. By the end of this film, the film starts off with Martin Lawrence saying, I don't want to kill anyone ever again. And by the end of the film, he's all too giddy to shoot a helicopter pilot in the face and is ecstatic that he did that, and then caused a huge big fireball. Now here's the thing. I know that a lot of action films have like kind of this premise, where, because they're all about the action and the violence, they tend to, kind of like, sneer at the concept of being nonviolent. I mean, we saw that last year with Zombieland 2, which, a lot of, sometimes action films will do this. They'll have some supporting character who says, I don't believe in violence and I don't want to kill anyone. And then they'll usually be proven wrong either by a villain who will kill them or the hero just telling them to F off. Which, it's kind of weird that the way that Bad Boys for Life kind of approaches this, because this is stated by Martin Lawrence, who seems very genuine about not wanting to bring violence into the world, and about halfway through, actually not even halfway through, within the same scene, it becomes like a compelling argument for him not to get involved with the fight, and at the same time, a comedic goof for excusing him to get in the fight. Like, all it takes is a little bit of a convincing from Mike to say, hey, this gun came from God, and God wants you to kill all these criminals. And Marcus is just like, okay, I'll go ahead with it, because it's Bad Boys, whatever. So that aspect really did trouble me, especially since it just kind of goes into, standard action film by that point in the film. Now, that being said, that little philosophical problem of the film aside, as an action film, I think it actually works pretty well. There's a lot of great sequences here. It almost, I guess, like, I don't want to quite compare it to, like, the previous Bad Boys films, but I think if you do, this film actually looks a little bit better. Because this film, it feels a little bit understated. I mean, you get great car chases, you have comedic fight sequences, and great shootouts, and a lot of witty banter. But it always felt like it was just a little bit toned down. It always felt like the banter never went on too long. It always felt like the car chases were just perfectly shot enough where it's not chaotic and we can tell what's going on. It even felt like the explosions were contained enough so we could appreciate them. Like, there's a great scene where Will Smith is basically running off the back of a truck as these little, compared to Michael Bay, these kind of like little explosions are going off behind him. And it's kind of like, oh, this is actually pretty competent and actually pretty clever. I actually kind of dug these sequences. I also kind of dug, there's a few easy jokes about how old they're getting, how, Will Smith has to dye his beard, and how Martin Lawrence can't quite keep up with him. He's a little bit older, they got to work out more. They're not as hip with the lingo. They got to work with some police officers that are a little bit younger and may not be able to sing the Bad Boys theme as well. But like I said, it doesn't feel like they go for a lot of the easy jokes, which I know that if Michael Bay were in charge here, he would have amped them up to an absurd and annoying degree. And it never quite felt like that. I mean, the central story eventually centers around, like family, not quite to the degree that I was kind of both fearing and hoping for, if that kind of makes sense. There are certain aspects of their, their desire for family that I kind of dug, and other aspects where I felt like this just feels standard action movie-ish stuff here, like the way that it's delivered. But I got to admit, with the addition of Vanessa Hudgens to the role, like she brings real grit to her role. It's so much fun to have Joe Pantoliano here back as like the chief who chews them out, says like, it's my ass on the line, you guys. It's a fairly standard action trope, but he plays it up well. There's a lot of other actors here who we feel are kind of stuck in their lanes and their tropes of like what they have to do. But for sticking in that kind of lane, the film is sufficient. It kind of like I said, it kind of goes into autopilot by the end and kind of like forgets this philosophical angle, maybe even forget a little bit more of the family angle, and just kind of favors like the grittier action. And for most of that, it kind of works. It's just that, I don't know, I can't quite let go of this philosophical angle that it brings up, which it really shouldn't. Like if it just made it a punchline, like it stated, like it was quite clearly going to be a punchline and not just kind of like a semi-serious confession of Marcus, and kind of like didn't play so much on a philosophy of nonviolence and also like a devotion to faith, and didn't just kind of set it up as genuine and then just kind of warp it into a joke, it wouldn't have bothered me as much. And especially because like it's interesting. The whole film kind of feels a little bit like understated. Like I mentioned with the banter and the chemistry, it never feels like it gets too annoying. In fact, by the end, it almost kind of shirks all the jokes and just kind of takes itself very earnestly, which is kind of admirable and also kind of frustrating for a Bad Boys film, because I don't know, we've kind of grown used to Bad Boys films usually being a little bit more over the top and a little bit more absurd. But I guess, that's kind of Michael Bay style, and this is, directors who are taking a much different take on it, which I appreciate. I just wish they could have thought through a little bit more of the philosophy angle, because it doesn't really turn into an arc and just sort of turns into a little bit of an absurdist punchline that didn't quite sit well with me throughout the picture. So, for Bad Boys for Life, 2.5 out of 5 stars.